Welcome to ESPN Classic's Who's Number One. I'm Trey Wingo. Listen, I'm going to tell you right now, this show is all about genius, more specifically coaching genius, which means we're talking about the people who come up with the X's and O's, who can motivate, manipulate, elevate, and most importantly, win. We're about to separate the just good from the legendary. So grab your playbooks. This is ESPN Classic's countdown of the 20 greatest coaches of all time.
Number 20.
John McGraw established a style of playing the game and set a tone in managing that was followed by everybody who came after him.
John McGraw's classic idea was that you get on base, then you get sacrificed in second, then you steal third, you score on a ground ball or a fly ball, and you got the run, and you win 1-0.
He was, I think, probably the first superstar manager. And he gave other managers a lot of power. He brought a lot of authority to the office.
Under the lash of John McGraw and employing his principles of small ball, the New York Giants won 3 World Series and 10 pennants during the feisty skipper's 30-year tenure, including the 2.5 seasons he managed the Baltimore Orioles. The taskmaster known as Little Napoleon amassed 2,763 wins, second only to Connie Mack.
The day he retired in 1932, Lou Gehrig also hit 4 home runs in the Yankees game that same day. And McGraw was on the front page of the New York Times, and Gehrig was on the sports page. He set the tone for professional coaching in this country.
19. Number 19.
Pat Riley's on this list because he won, and he proved he could win. And he did it by getting players to accept a mentality that rejected losing bitterly, forced them to examine themselves as players, took the skills of the players and allowed them to flourish.
Pat Riley has so many different ways of motivating and stimulating his players mentally. He's always looking for that edge. He's always looking for something else to motivate his players and to get the most out of them.
If you're committed to winning, you're going to like, playing for me. If you're committed to hard work, you're going to like playing for me. And you try to get those players committed to those things.
And I'm guaranteeing everybody here, next year we're going to win it again.
Pat Riley is the consummate button pusher, a master at finding just the right avenue into a player's mind. He's been able to reach superstar or last man on the bench. He won 4 NBA titles with the Showtime Lakers of the 80s, and in 2006, a 5th ring with the Miami Heat.
His ability to relate to Magic Johnson and Dwayne Wade, to Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, and now Shaquille O'Neal, the best center of this era. He's able to relate to players from different eras. That's a very impressive thing about winning titles 18 years apart.
Number 18.
And what else are you doing? I'm going to have to take you out if you don't. Play defense and board.
Pat Summitt is almost scary at times. You watch her on TV, you see her in person, and the fire in her eyes, that intensity to win. She is Vince Lombardi on a basketball court.
Don, what do you not understand about passive every time?
I'm very intense. I don't hide that. I'm tough. I'm demanding. I expect more from every player that walks in the door than probably they would ever expect from themselves. But I think what people don't understand is how much I care, how much I love those kids. And, they become like daughters to me.
Starting in 1974, Pat Summitt built a dynasty. Tennessee was and remains one of the gold standards of women's basketball. She's captured 6 national titles and has piled up more wins than any NCAA coach, regardless of gender or school size.
She was kind of like the person that everyone identified with when they talked about women's basketball.
We got a good group to run motion.
And she's very, very good at articulating what women's basketball is and what it can be.
Number 17.
Strictly as a X's and O's, teaching on the floor, changing strategy in games, getting the most out of your players. I don't believe there's ever been a coach better than Bob Knight.
He felt that it's 3 times tougher mentally than it is physically to be successful in basketball. And then he just drill you on the basics. And he felt by the time you got into a pressure situation, you'd stay with the basics. And more often than not, the other person's going to make a mistake.
Robert Montgomery Knight is a confounding mixture of coaching genius, volcanic rage, and profane philosopher. Coaching in 5 decades at Army, Indiana, and Texas Tech, he's won 3 national championships and more than 850 games. His 1976 Hoosiers were the last to compile a perfect record in Division I.
I really enjoy watching the game played well. And from a selfish standpoint, I think I enjoy trying to figure out how we can play against your team or his team and do it well. And that's the difference that a coach has over anybody else in athletics, I think.
Número 16.
Paterno could dissect the needs, the potential exigencies of the game that was coming up, and the other team as well as anybody.
Come on, get to the ball, let's go!
Once I make up my mind to do something, I really do everything possible, physically, mentally, emotionally, to get it done. And I don't get sidetracked.
Think about making 4 yards. And then you have a short yard adjustment.
More than half a century at the same school and still going strong, Joe Paterno remains the symbol of Penn State, known as much for his deeds off the field as for his triumphs on it. With more than 350 wins and 2 national titles, it's difficult to tell where the man leaves off and the legend begins, and vice versa.
Joe Paterno is the consummate football coach. Great coaches are great teachers, and they teach more than how to go out and throw a block.
It's not about anything more than dealing with people. It's people skills, because we're in the people business, and Joe has it and always did have it.
Number 15.
Bill Walsh is the greatest coach ever, I think. He was an innovator. Everyone still talks about the West Coast offense.
A lot of it was dependent on quick timed throws, as well as play action passing where you're faking then throwing. And each year, this offense became more and more detailed, more and more sophisticated, more and more complete, to the point that when I arrived with the San Francisco 49ers, it became a complete, fully dimensional offense.
In only 10 seasons, Bill Walsh revamped the way pro football, especially offense, was played. With Hall of Fame quarterback Joe Montana at the controls of a diversified and precision passing attack, the 49ers won 3 Super Bowls. Walsh transformed a 2-14 team into a true dynasty.
Bill's a great coach, one of the greatest. Granted, some coaches there have won more games than he has, but they didn't start where he started.
What made him a great football person was his ability to focus an entire organization, his ability to build an organization with one singular purpose.
14.
Shula has the greatest command presence of any coach I've ever known.
You felt Shula was there. When he walked into our meeting room, everybody just hushed up.
I wear my feelings on my sleeve, and there's no camouflage. And I think in some ways that might have been intimidating.
Bum Phillips once said of Don Shula, he could take his and beat yours and take yours and beat his. At Baltimore and then Miami, the jut-jawed perfectionist won an NFL record 347 games, including 2 Super Bowls. With the Dolphins in the 1972 season, Shula produced the only perfect record in league history.
I hope that I'm going to be remembered as, the coach that won the most games, the perfect season certainly, and then also for trying to do things the right way.
Number 13.
The greatest manager I ever played for was Joe McCarthy. His idea of a rookie coming in was to play him at the beginning of the season, and no matter how well he played or how badly he played, He'd make you sit next to him for 2 weeks. And he'd ask you questions to make sure you're in the ball game.
McCarthy was the best manager that ever lived, that had the ability to make a ball player bear down to win.
I want to say one thing, that I am very happy to be the manager of such a great game ball club as the Yankee Ball Club.
Joe McCarthy managed for 24 Major League seasons and posted the best winning percentage, .614, in history. With him at the helm, the Yankees won 7 World Series, including 4 straight beginning in 1936. McCarthy was also a pioneer in dress for success.
He was the first Major League manager to insist that his players wear suits and ties while traveling.
Joe McCarthy said to me that it's important when you're a champion to look like one, feel like one. Everybody looks at you, they say, there's a championship team.
Number 12. 12.
Belichick is probably the smartest coach ever to walk an NFL sidelines. He is able to break down film and understand tendencies better than anyone I've ever seen.
Belichick has a great ability to watch an opponent play and decide what's one thing that team does that makes them comfortable. We're going to take that away.
And Bill Belichick and his staff coming up with a brilliant defensive game plan.
As a defensive coordinator, Bill Belichick acquired the reputation of chess master. But in his first go-round as a head coach in the NFL, he bombed in Cleveland. He then regrouped, however, and grew as he went, leading New England to 3 Super Bowl titles in 4 years.
Bill Belichick's done a very, very good job at teaching the team what the team needs to do to win in a game.
He never tries to alibi anything that's happened. If he has injuries, the next guy just lines up and plays.
I remember when they played the Rams in the Super Bowl. I mean, just a dominant performance. You saw his handprints all over that Super Bowl because of the physical play of his defensive backfield in the corners.
He understands how to put guys in position, and the guys understand how where they fit in the scheme of things. That's what separates Coach Belichick from any other coaches.
11. Number 11.
11.
Dean always knew how to use his best players the best way while still incorporating a team concept.
He was very innovative. They had what they call 4 corners. And if you were playing against them, you just dreaded that time.
He originated the idea of the huddle at the foul line. Acknowledgement of a good pass by pointing, zone traps. I can't think of anybody that brought more new ideas to the game than Dean.
Innovator and motivator, Dean Smith retired with more victories, 879, than any coach in NCAA basketball history. And he did it all at the same school, 36 seasons at North Carolina, with 23 straight NCAA tournament appearances and 2 national titles. He demonstrated leadership early on.
He was a catcher in baseball. He was a quarterback in football. He was a point guard in basketball. So all the various sports, the positions he played, he was in control.
It really bothered me when somebody called. We had a system, IBM of college basketball. We had a way we'd like to play, but we would change year to year with our personnel.
I know there are coaches out there that have had a positive impact on our sport. I can't think of one that has done it any better with any more grace or class than him. He cared about the game, and he made it better.
Welcome back to Who's Number One. Look, selecting the greatest coaches of all time was brutal. Just consider some that didn't make the cut. How about George Halas, NFL founding father and winner of 6 championships? Or Toe Blake with 8 Stanley Cups in Montreal? Pittsburgh's Chuck Noll, the first to win 4 Super Bowls? Eddie Robinson, the first college football coach to record 400 wins? And the traveling man, Larry Brown, first to win an NCAA and NBA title. So who's left? Well, that's what we do. Let's get back to our countdown.
Let's go, Duke.
Perception and image, they say, is everything. No, not in my mind. In my mind, truth and reality is everything behind closed doors. And once you're in the locker room, a little more like Bobby Knight.
He does more to instill belief in his team than any coach I've ever been around. And it's typical of what he is. He never really loses it when he has to. He knows exactly the right buttons to push.
Mike Krzyzewski won 73 games in 5 seasons at Army, which was enough to convince Duke officials he was their guy. There were doubters after back-to-back 17-loss seasons early on, but Coach K has since transformed the Blue Devils into a perennial powerhouse with 3 national championships.
People reduce the game to X's and O's, and it's not X's and O's or positions. It's people. And so before you diagram a play or give them a situation, you got to know who they are as people at that moment, and then try to put them in a position which will make them successful. We want you to be a player every time you catch the ball.
He's built a program step by step from when he started out, and he's created a culture where players dream of coming to play for Coach K and to play at Duke.
I define Stengel as the greatest manager in my years in baseball for this reason. He understood his players. He knew more about you within 1 week than you knew about yourself.
He really invented the modern platoon system. In the 40s and 50s, you never heard about roles, but he understood it. He had relief pitchers. He had players that blended with others. He had guys that could come off the bench. He really saw where the game was going.
In his first 2 major league managerial stops with the Brooklyn Dodgers and Boston Braves, Casey Stengel was 165 games under 500. But in 1949, the Yankees hired him, and there followed 10 American League pennants, 7 World Series, and an engaging malaprop spouting legend.
I think he was a master at dealing with the media, only because if he didn't want to tell them anything, he could go into that double talk and they would know what he was talking about.
Stengel uses a language based on English, but understandable only to those who understood baseball. The youth of America always meant rookies. The men in blue were umpires. That fella over there was always Mickey Mantle.
I don't believe our game will ever again see another one like it. Casey loved the game, and he loved the people. And that's why, to me, when we talk about the guys, there's only one to really talk about, and that's Casey Stengel.
He started with guys who knew which way to the mat, but he didn't start all the time with great wrestlers. He made them that way. If you wrestle for Dan Gable, I think you're afraid not to give it your all.
If I see you not doing something, I'll put one of you down.
He was as into it as if he were still training to go to the Olympics, as if he'd never won an NCAA championship.
Every workout was trying to see how much more tired he can get his athletes. In order to break people, it has to be some degree of physical torture.
Okay, let's turn it around, buddy. Let's get tough. We need to get back on the winning track here a little bit, okay? Come on. Tough. Let's go.
Driven by a boiling intensity, Dan Gable made himself into America's greatest amateur wrestler. And then he turned to coaching, and in 21 years at Iowa, led the Hawkeyes to 15 national championships, including 9 straight from 1978 to 1986. He was the Pied Piper of the mat.
Guys grew up wanting to go there just because, he set the standard in the sport. There was a pretty high standard there, and the only way to leave there was to be a national champ.
I get the people to believe in what I'm saying, respect me. I probably get more people to work harder than the other person. And there's always something to be gained, there's always something to be learned, always something to be just pushed a little bit more.
Number 7.
Phil believes in doing it a different way. First of all, he believes in communication with his players differently than most of us.
He has a very good understanding of how to gain your attention, how to bond a group together and bring its mind and everything together as one.
Phil Jackson speaks of ancient tribal mysticism, and you swear you can hear the drums and smell the campfire smoke, and none of that should have anything to do with basketball, but he makes it seem so.
The beating of the drum replaces the heartbeat. We
we try to talk about a beat, there's kind of a tribal essence that you're trying to get accomplished with a team, trying to get everybody kind of uniting at the same beat, the same rhythm, the same mood.
One of the sayings he had was, the power of we is greater than the power of me. Those are things that all of us bought into.
He wants you to understand yourself first, and then you have to go and try to prove it to him that you know the game of basketball, or you know how to be a professional man.
Employing the triangle offense devised by assistant coach Tex Winter, Jackson coached the Bulls and Lakers to 9 NBA titles. And though he appears the placid Zen master, inside he burns for more success.
People will look back when his coaching career is over and say he did it with a very unique style. Others will say, hey, he had the players, but you still have to deliver.
Phil wants to be remembered as the basketball genius that he is, the Zen master that he is, and he also wants to be remembered for breaking Red Auerbach's record of NBA championships.
Number 6.
The ability to pull people together, unify them, sell them on a single mission, and go do it. Nobody was better at it, in my opinion, than Paul William Bryant.
Get ready, let's get ready, let's get ready!
He believed that players played best when they were driven to the edge. As a result, his practices were virtual death camps.
To me, he was like God. I mean, he was a handsome, tough, good-looking man. And when he spoke, you listened.
For 38 seasons at Maryland, Kentucky, Texas A&M, and especially at Alabama, Paul William Bryant left a footprint on college football as big as a bear paw. He observed practice from atop a tall tower, the eagle on his perch.
There was something about the tower that said he's looking at us, and we've got to do it right. Coach and player.
He came down one day, I missed a block, grabbed me by the nose guard, and threw me to the ground to symbolize that he could take the biggest guy there down.
Between 1961 and 1979, Bryant's Bama teams won 5 AP national championships. He integrated the program in 1971, just as he was switching to the wishbone offense. When he retired in 1982, his 323 wins were a Division I-A record.
Coach Bryant, look you in the eye, I don't care who you were, and connect. He understood how a man felt. He understood what was inside of guys.
Even though Bear Bryant appeared to be calloused and tough and brutal, ask the people he coached. He gave them a gift. He was forever giving them a gift. And I think that Bear Bryant had a tremendous soul in that regard.
Rockne is not only the greatest coach of the 20th century in college football, he's the most important individual of the 20th century in college football.
Go, go, go! Fight, 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 fight!
During that period of the 20s, there were 3 very distinctive voices in America that people heard over the radio. My grandfathers, Will Rogers, and Babe Ruth.
Usually that voice was explaining another Notre Dame victory. Knute Rockne created a football superpower in South Bend. In his 13 seasons, the Irish lost only a dozen times, and his .881 winning percentage remains the best in Division I-A history.
He truly was a genius in what he did. He had a knack of identifying talent. He had a knack of developing that talent, of motivating that talent. And then he had a real knack for strategy and identifying how to beat teams. Quick and agile at a time when football was a pretty slow-paced game.
He also was an initiator of various new things in football. He, for instance, brought about the famous Notre Dame shift.
1, 2, 3, shift!
It was that shift the fabled Four Horsemen rode to the first of Rockne's 3 national titles in 1924. 7 years later, at the age of 43, he perished in a plane crash.
The funeral was broadcast not only all over America, by CBS, but it went by shortwave to Europe, to Asia, to South America. So the man literally touched all of this country and really beyond.
What made Scotty Bowman such a great coach is the number of Stanley Cups that he's won. When you look at it all, he's probably the most successful coach in any sport.
Bowman on the bench saw things clearly, saw them whole, saw them before anybody else did.
See, there's an important thing on that shot. It was along the ice, it hit the backboards and came out in front. And Ralph was, well, right in front of that where he should be.
He had a commanding presence behind the bench, the imposing look of a bulldog, and it seemed to inspire those who skated for him. When Scotty Bowman retired in 2002 after 30 years in the NHL, his teams won 9 Stanley Cups, more than any other coach.
If you look at the teams that won for him, Montreal was an exciting team to watch. And being in Pittsburgh and watching Mario, the way they played were exciting. So going to Detroit with guys like Stevie Yzerman, they were fun to watch. So not only did he win, but he captured the imagination of the fans, and he made it exciting for them.
The times changed, and Bowman changed with them. He won Stanley Cups in 3 different decades with 3 different franchises. He posted the most regular season and postseason victories in history, partly by the way he handled his players.
He keeps his players off guard, keeps them guessing. They never second guess what he does because they never know what he's going to do. But he probably got the best out of me because he knew how to push the right buttons.
People who played for him sometimes couldn't stand him. But at the end of the year, they were holding the Stanley Cup, mainly because of Scotty.
He worked as hard as any of his players, and all he asked in return, you do the same thing. If you're going to go to war, I think Scotty Bowman's the type of man you want to go to war with.
Red Auerbach was a bad winner. The cigar just irritated the opposition. He'd light it up when he felt the game was clinched.
He was just the greatest psychologist that I've ever met in sports, any sport.
He'll walk over to JoJo White and say, JoJo, I just saw Brian outside. Boy, that son of yours getting big. He's getting great. JoJo be happy. He'll walk over to Dave Coward and give him a cigar. Dave is happy. He'll walk over to Paul Fowler and say, Paul Fowler, yeah. And Paul Fowler say, red. And Paul is happy.
In 16 years on the Boston bench, Arnold Red Auerbach lit up enough victory smokes to pollute a small city. His Celtics won 9 NBA titles, including 8 in a row from 1959 to 1966. And he acquired the reputation of master innovator.
He was a realist. He knew how to win with the least amount of wasted motion, which was put your best 5 people out there, attack them defensively, and then, in terms of your own offense, just run it down their throat.
Auerbach dreamed up the 6th man, made Frank Ramsey the 6th man. Nobody had ever thought about that before.
It became such an effective tool for getting that guy to get the feeling that he was appreciated. Not a destructive force, a very important player.
At the 1950 draft, Auerbach changed the color of the NBA by dropping this bombshell.
I was there in Boston, and when they drafted, when Red got up and said, Charles Cooper of Duquesne, you could hear a pin drop.
There was a gentleman's agreement in professional basketball that there would never be more blacks on the court than whites. But Red, he's not looking for racial balance, he's looking for W's. It was talk of the town. Can you believe it? Red starting 5 brothers.
In his 20 years as an NBA coach, Auerbach was the first to win 1,000 games, including the postseason. Although only 48, he retired in 1966 to concentrate on his general manager duties. In the 30-year span beginning in 1957, the Celtics won 16 championships.
What really made the Celtics work is the same thing that made UCLA work.
And that's the leadership at the top. At UCLA, it was John Wooden. For the Boston Celtics, it was Red Auerbach.
Number 2.
Football was energy and discipline and pain and severe cold weather. Vince Lombardi seemed to embody the football ethic.
Just hit, just run, just block, and just tackle.
He wanted to win more than anything in the world. He enjoyed it. He had a great ego for winning.
Everything that you have, everything that you want, is going to be small in comparison to what it is.
Once I went to a clinic up in Reno, and he was a speaker. And I was a junior college coach at the time. And Vince Lombardi spoke on one play, the Green Bay sweep, for 8 hours.
In 1959, the struggling Green Bay Packers met their new head coach, former New York Giants assistant, Brooklyn-born Vince Lombardi. They would hear his voice in their sleep, and it was always the same message.
He says, I have never been a loser, and I'm not about to start now. And if you're not willing to pay the price, make the sacrifice, do the things you have to do to win, then get the hell out.
I ran downstairs and called my wife back in Alabama, and all I said to her was, honey, we're going to begin to win.
At moments you hated him because he was the master psychologist of all coaches that I know of.
There's nothing that they can show you out there. You have to face a number of times, right?
He knew when to drive people. He knew which ones to drive. He knew which ones to praise and when to praise them.
His Packers used to say of their coach, he treats us all the same, like dogs. But they dominated the NFL in the 1960s, winning 9 of 10 playoff games and 5 titles, including the first 2 Super Bowls. His effect on his players lingers still.
He was able to take people, everybody, and motivate those same people all the time. And I don't think that there was anybody that played for Coach Lombardi that did not play better for Coach Lombardi than they would have played for any other coach alive.
I think if every ball player is honest with themselves, there isn't one day or 1 month goes by that you don't either think about him one way or the other, good or bad, but you think about him.
Welcome back to Who's Number One and the greatest coaches of all time. Let's recap. John McGraw. Pat Riley. Pat Summitt. Bob Knight. Joe Paterno. Bill Walsh. Don Shula. Joe McCarthy. Bill Belichick. Dean Smith. Mike Krzyzewski. Casey Stengel. Dan Gable. Phil Jackson. Bear Bryant. Newt Rockman. Scotty Bowman. Red Auerbach. Vince Lombardi. So who's your pick for number one? Here's ours. The greatest coach ever.
Number 1. Número 1.
the best coaching record in the history of basketball. 10 national championships in 12 years. 88 game winning streak. 38 in a row in the tournament.
He won his first championship with guards as his main players. And then he won with centers. And then he won with forwards.
He never scouted other team. He was more concerned about what his team was going to do when they were playing.
My own idea of success came about because of my dad trying to teach me and my brothers on the farm that never try to be better than someone else. Learn from others and never cease trying to be the best you can be.
Long before the Army adopted that slogan, Wooden was urging his players to be all that they could be. The Wizard of Westwood based his teachings on what he called the pyramid of success. It was geometry at its best. 4 times his Bruins were perfect 30-0 national champions.
I carry around Coach Wooden's pyramid of success in my wallet. All the human values, all the personal characteristics that he preached to us that we would need in our life to be eventually successful. That's what the pyramid is all about.
For him, it was not necessarily wins and losses, but how he affected young men's lives.
Winning and losing was not talked about during the year. There may be a halftime speech that revolved around the vocabulary word enthusiasm or industriousness.
The first day of practice, he literally showed you, gentlemen, this is how we put our socks on. We make sure there's no wrinkles, because if there's wrinkles, you get blisters.
I mean, he knew to the precise second where we were supposed to be on the court and what he wanted to do instructionally.
Wooden's teams compiled 664 wins with an .804 winning percentage. While he had the prim and proper manner of a schoolteacher, beneath that soft-shell facade lay a coiled steel spring. The Wizard had a passion and a rage that belied his composed appearance.
John Wooden rode players and coaches like Leo DeRocher in baseball. He was vicious. He could make a player cry with the things he said, and he never swore.
He has the image of the parson, but he had that rolled-up program. And he would talk to the opposing players through that rolled-up program.
There's a guy from Duke, Bob Verga, who was an All-American. And as soon as Verga would come close to him, Lucius Allen's going to eat you up tonight. You haven't seen anybody as quick as Lucius Allen. I can't wait to get him on you. Bob Verga's going, he said, is that Coach Wooden talking to me?
John Wooden's on another cloud. I mean, everybody else is looking up, and he's like some rain god. He's just raining down on them. But he's the best coach our country's ever produced.
So all that's left now is to submit ESPN Classic's rankings to our second guessers, 2 of ESPN Radio's finest. Co-host of Game Night, Doug Gottlieb, and the host of the Sports Bash, Eric Casillas. Don't bash us.
All right, I'm looking at the list, and I think they got the top 4 right. If I was making a Mount Rushmore of coaches, Wooden, Lombardi, Red Auerbach, and Scotty Bowman, I don't have a big problem with that. So where are you going to kick us off and say that you got an issue?
Actually, I have an issue with Auerbach because I think we overvalue Auerbach considering who he had, all the Hall of Famers he had in his team. And if you look at Bill Russell's numbers, remember when Bill Russell was in college at San Francisco, they won 55 consecutive games, 2 back-to-back national titles. And then after Red Auerbach retired, they continued to win NBA titles with Bill Russell as the head coach. The fact was they had the most dominant, most competitive defensive player and team leader in the NBA, but and he's surrounded by Hall of Famers.
He's beating Wilt Chamberlain. He's beating Jerry West. He's beating Elgin Baylor. Yeah. He's beating all 3 of those guys at the same time. It's not like Red Auerbach was marching to the finals a la Phil Jackson, beating Patrick Ewing and a bunch of guys who are out bagging groceries right now.
Wait, I guess the problem is that I know in your voice, and I know you, that you don't like Phil Jackson. And the fact is that Phil Jackson won all these titles, okay, because he can control egos, but you forget that Phil Jackson won 2 CBA titles. You want to talk about coaching?
You may be right, and I can't argue about CBA titles. I can say this about Phil Jackson, though. When your mantra as a head coach is basically, I'm the Forrest Gump of head coaches, right place, right time, and I can win if you give me 2 of the 3 best players in the NBA at the same time, I don't know if that gets you onto the top 10 of the all-time greatest coaches in any sport that have ever walked a sideline. One of the problems I have is when I look at the list, Joe Paterno's on the list and Bobby Bowden's not on the list. And to me, you either got to have both guys on or both guys off. I mean, Bobby Bowden has more wins, but it's pretty close. I mean, they kind of battle back and forth. They're within 5 of each other. Same amount of national championships. There's contemporaries, same school forever, kind of the same thing. If you blindfolded the stats and didn't show the school, you could almost get confused as to who was where. I think that even if I had to pick one, I'd probably pick Bowden. So I don't like the fact that Paterno's on and Bowden's off.
I don't see a problem with that. I mean, I think of how many national championships Bowden lost because of the field goal kicker. Now, maybe that's his own fault because he didn't go recruit the best field goal kicker there was.
And Paterno has 5 undefeated
Right.
seasons, so but for the way they vote in college football, he could have more than 2 also.
No, yeah, I don't have a problem with marriage, putting those guys and say, hey, if one's there, the other's there as well, because they've had a profound impact.
Here's my absolute biggest problem on the list.
Okay.
And I know I'm going to aggravate every Dolphin fan in America, but Don Shula on this list to me is a travesty. This guy didn't win a title in the last 20 years that he coached. He has a 19-17 playoff record and had arguably the greatest quarterback ever and couldn't get him a running game or a defense for more than a decade to get this team over the hump. He also lost the biggest, most important game in NFL history, Super Bowl III. You know, who Joe Namath got, goes off the finger and does the wave.
Yeah,
you
the
know who he
guarantee.
beat that game?
He
He beat
Don
Don
Shula.
Shula in that game. To me, to have Don Shula on this list simply because he amasses a lot of wins would be akin to putting Lenny Wilkins on the list because he has a lot of wins.
I would disagree with that way. Don Shula was a great coach when he was with the Colts. He was a great coach when he was with the Miami Dolphins. And lest we forget, who was the last team to go undefeated in the National Football League? It's the Miami Dolphins.
Give me George Halas on the list. 6 titles to the 2 that Shula has. Plus, he's been a pioneer, and the wins are pretty close. If you're going to go with those guys, give me George Halas on the list, who has better stats, better numbers, and more titles than Don Shula, who was basically a guy who didn't win the last 20 years of his career.
Well, I would also, if Bill Walsh is going to be on this list, then Bill Parcells has to be on this list because Bill Walsh is on this list because of his influence. Well, how about Bill Parcells' influence? I'm surprised. Larry Brown, I thought he's the pound-for-pound best coach in the NBA. He doesn't make the list. Very, very surprising.
I won't put Larry Brown on, but I will put these 20 guys on. We go back now to Trey Wingo.
Now that the second guessers have had their say, it's time to see how you, the fan, voted on Sports Nation on ESPN.com for the greatest coaches of all time. Number 5, Red Auerbach. Number 4, Vince Lombardi. Number 3, Dan Gable. Number 2, John Wooden. Number 1, Pat Summitt. So that's it for this edition of ESPN Classic's Who's Number 1. I'm Trey Wingo, and thanks for joining us for our ranking of the 20 greatest coaches of all time. We'll be back to continue our countdown of the teams, the athletes, and the events that have shaped our world of sports. Until then, let the debating begin.